Fragments of Silicon, audio now available in all major resolutions.
Alright, welcome to another installment of Fragments of Silicon. I'm your host, Adam. Joining me as always are Gollix and Pettyfan, the tag team with no name.
Yeah, I can go with that one.
Not the worst one.
Not even going to comment on the inherent contradiction. I'm disappointed. Anyway.
That's half of why I like it.
Right. Anyway, let's get to the news. Petty, why don't you start us off this week?
Oh. Overall, the week's been fairly tame. Still waiting on when they're gonna schedule my mom's arm surgeries. And now frickin' workers' comp wants to try and fight her on it because she got a lawyer. Because they weren't going to tell her after 2 years they were just going to stop paying for any rehab or anything. So, yeah, and they wonder why she got a lawyer.
They don't wonder. They know why.
So yeah, that's been fun. I was supposed to go to the dentist tomorrow to get a root canal finished. But apparently, instead of letting me make payments on the whole thing because it wasn't covered under insurance, they want the other half of it, which is like $350. So yeah, we had to push that back to the sometime beginning of next month. So that's fun. And yeah, I don't think there's anything else other than Digimon stuff going good. I've been playing Metroid Dread.
Same.
I think I'm near the end.
What was the last power-up you got?
Wave.
Then yes, you're pretty close to the end.
Well, I'm not that far yet. Spoilers.
I mean...
Oh no, it's a Metroid game in which you get the wave beam. It must be any Metroid game.
Well, I didn't know if you guys were going to start talking about what happens after that, so...
No, I wasn't.
Oh, God, no. Game's been out for, less than a week?
And this one's actually worth, not spoiling.
Mm-hmm.
We'll probably talk about that game in detail sometime next year, I think.
Yeah. And, yeah, just been kind of trying not to go insane. So I guess
Okay.
next victim.
That's you, Gollix.
Well, it's definitely starting to be proper autumn. It finally had some days where the temperature is below 50, at least significant parts of it. Though today in the office, the heat got up to 80 in the afternoon when the sun was coming in, so, it comes and goes.
Well, that's also indoors versus outdoors.
Yeah. Yeah, I cracked open the window and I'm it really feels hot, and I had to go and check the thermostat. It's 70, and I'm eh. Anyway, otherwise, there have not been too many new actual developments. I have not started to play Metroid Dread yet because I want to play it with a friend, and they have not been available. But if they're not available again this Friday, I'm going to start on my own.
Is there co-op in the game?
No, we just like to play games in the same room.
Oh.
I mean, technically it's on the Switch, so you could hand the other Joy-Con and make it real interesting.
That would make it very interesting, since this is a game that uses all the buttons.
I know!
My friend and I beat Resident Evil 4 on professional mode on the Wii, with one person holding the Wiimote and one person holding the nunchuck. That was phenomenal.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. Okay, like so you do the aiming. I'll switch to missiles, and then you fire.
Yeah.
And don't even talk about the friggin' Shine Spark puzzles.
Oh God!
Oh, that would be fine. That'd be fine.
Before or after he donkey punches his partner?
Donkey
Yeah.
punch. Like, I think you're talking about something a bit more intimate than what's going on here.
We are referring to the part of it that is a sharp blow in the back of the head.
Yeah.
I know, it's just, the rest of that doesn't fit.
Fair.
Yes.
Anyway, anything
Anyway.
else?
Not much else new.
Okay, I guess it's my go. Let's see. Yeah, the fall season is finally starting to crack the local weather. Like, in that the mornings are getting somewhat cool. Like, I think it was 59, 60 degrees, like at 6 in the morning. Like,
Oh, it's starting to get to the point where you might not want to go swimming on any given day.
in the mornings, after, like, when the sun gets up, that, it's pretty nice for the rest of the morning. Once it gets to the afternoon, it's still 70.
Mm-hmm.
Like what you're talking about not coming for another couple of months. Like, this is still the temperate part of Florida. So, while we don't get snow, we do get somewhat low temperatures compared to, say, Miami.
I know. I'm just salty because it's been really shitty and warm here for like way too long.
Mm-hmm.
Now that I can relate to. Like, throw humid into the mix, and I can very much relate.
Uh-huh.
Like, but outside of that, let's see. I suppose in games, I'm currently playing through. What was it? Oh, right, Cyber Shadow. You might remember that we covered that game last week. Didn't you can go check out that interview. Yeah, not surprising. It's a very good game.
Shocking.
Better than Shovel Knight? We'll find out this Sunday. Like,
Wink, wink.
yeah. And let's see. Well, I mean, not much else going on in this neck of the woods this week, which is not necessarily a bad thing. So, merrily, we shall roll along to the interview portion of the broadcast. And joining us this week is Jason Smith of Jasozz Games. Is that how that's pronounced?
Jasozz. It's like my name, but then with Z's at the end.
Ah, there we go. Jasozz. Anyway,
It's like your name, but you fall asleep at the end.
So actually, where that came from was way back when the Wii first came out, and I was trying to create a me, and I was trying to type my name out on the stupid finicky pointer keyboard on the Wii. I tried to hit the N, and it like jumped my cursor to the bottom left of the keyboard and hit the Z, and I was like, all right, that works too.
That makes sense. I mean, it's cool. It's just a little bit funny. Also, if anybody asks, you can say that the Z's are just N's on their side.
That's right. It kind of got jumbled up there.
Okay. Right, so how we like to get properly started is we like to get to know the person behind the game, behind the studio, and all that good sense. And we do that by asking this question. What got you interested in video games, both on a personal and a professional level?
Well, my overall enjoyment of video games can probably be blamed solely on my dad. When I was younger, he was big into DOS games, so got into like Doom and Dark Forces and stuff like that really early. And then we got a Super Nintendo and a PlayStation, and so I watched him play through games like Super Metroid, which I then played, and then like Resident Evil, which I then got into. So, and it kind of went from there. And then so I grew up playing video games. And then when I was around 10 or 11, I started getting into I wanted to get into animating, but I didn't own any animation software, didn't own Flash or anything like that. So I decided the best way to start would be in PowerPoint with setting the slide transitions to 1/10 of a second, which kind of makes animations. And then the next logical step from there was game development, because I decided I wanted to I wanted to make my own games. I wanted to make my own Mega Mans and my own Zeldas and so on and so forth. So yeah, got started with Game Maker 5 way back in the day, and then kind of tinkered with that through middle school, high school, and then after high school and after college, I finally got into 3D development back in 2016, and here we are.
Indeed. And post college, did you work anywhere else in the industry?
No, I have actually never done anything professional in terms of game development. So my degree is in graphic design, but I don't really do that a whole lot anymore. I worked in like software support for a few years after working in graphic design photography for a while, and then just recently I finally switched over to working on Cultic full time. So as of a month ago, I've always been doing jobs kind of related to creative fields or technology fields, but never actually in the game design or game development field. But I guess I am now.
You, was there any particular reason, rationale, circumstance that led to you working on Cultic for full time?
So just kind of the progression of the project as it's grown. It started off just as a fun little experiment with kind of taking 3D models and rendering them out as 2D sprites and trying to emulate like older graphic styles with like the limited palettes and the 2D billboard sprites and that started getting a lot of traction on Twitter. People really liked the aesthetic, and it was a lot of fun to work with. And this idea for Cultic is actually something that I've had for a really long time, but I just never had the skills to make a first-person shooter. I'd never worked on 3D games before, and then when I finally got into 3D games, I didn't really have the 3D modeling chops to really get anywhere with it, and I didn't want to make it until I really felt that it would do my vision, the proper justice. And so when this little art style I started tinkering with started picking up a little traction, I was like, okay, I think this is it. Like, I think we figured it out. Um, and then, so I started working on Cultic in January of this year, so almost a year ago. Um, and I've only been working on it for like a month and a half when 3D Realms actually reached out to me, saying they really liked the direction the project was going, and that was crazy because I had never worked on video games in a professional capacity, and then suddenly this this company whose games I grew up playing is contacting me and telling me that they really like this project I'm working on. And so I had that meeting at like 7 in the morning because they were in Denmark, so we had to kind of do it on a time that worked for both of us. And I proceeded to have like the worst day of work ever, where I had to go from that meeting back to my day job, which sucked. But yeah, so that was really exciting. And then it got officially revealed as a 3D Realms game, and the trailer and demo dropped at Realms Deep this year, and it's just kind of grown from there. And we finally decided that it would be something that we should have me on full time. So 3D Realms made that possible. So they've been able to kind of sponsor the game and help me get worked on that full time.
I'm like certainly a, I guess for lack of a better term, Cinderella story. Like,
It's pretty crazy. Yeah, it's a big dream come true kind of thing. I feel like every time I talk about it, I say that like 10 times. But I mean, I've literally dreamed of working on games full time since I was a kid. And then, here we are. Dangerously close to 30 years old, but here we are. We finally made it.
like we've known people who broke in later than that. Like, you get all types on, especially on the indie scene. Like,
Yeah.
Mhm.
you know,
The
Yeah,
art for this is really interesting, though. It's like some kind of. It's not. It's like simultaneously very detailed and yet also low res. I want to say it's like the polygons are higher than you'd expect for the amount of pixels.
Yeah, so like all of the models that are used to create the objects in game are they're high quality models. Well, I mean I would give them like PS2 quality maybe, but there's definitely way more polygons than pixels per sprite because like the enemy sprites are only like 160 pixels tall.
Yeah.
Um, but that makes it so that the art's really flexible to work with.
Uh huh.
Like if I ever want to upres the sprites, or if I want to like be able to break an enemy model into gib sprites that are a little larger, I can do that without betraying you know, kind of like the low poly nature of them, and like the guns need to be up close to the screen because they're part of the view model, so those have to be high detail as well. And all
Yeah,
of the
that was the
models
thing that I first noticed it on. The gun, like the hammer is like separately modeled and stuff, and it all. It's
yeah,
it's
the gun.
it's just you get an interesting effect when you put like fairly, and like on the trucks, you still have like the curves of the thing all look pixely from every angle.
Right. Yeah.
It's just an interesting contrast.
Well, that's because it's part. I'm not sure if it was intended to be part of the wave, but it is considered to be part of the wave of the what they call the boomer shooter revival. Even though a boomer shooter is a very modern term. And for those out there in the audience who might not know what a boomer shooter is, it's a FPS that both refers to the tropes on and art style and display. It looks like a 90s shooter, it plays like a 90s shooter, it moves like a 90s shooter, and also like the age demographic that this is supposedly catering to. Even though demographically this is probably more Gen X shooters.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah.
I'm sure there were baby boomers who played those, but anyway,
I say the billing on the game, and kind of one of the things I try to sell it on, is that it's you know, like you said, you've got elements of the older games, you've got the aesthetic of the older games, but you got the advantages of a modern engine. So you have, you know, like a real physics engine, real time lighting, shadows, um, and stuff like that. But you're still kind of focusing on gameplay first, and you're keeping the graphics fairly simple, and you're just kind of really focusing on building an experience that doesn't also come with the frustrating DOS control binding and lack of proper looking up and down, and so on and so forth.
I was asking our gameplay operator here to play Blood, the original Blood. Right?
Oh, have you not played it?
He has, like, he rebelled against it.
You're
Because,
still a monster for that one.
Yeah, I do love Blood, and Blood is obviously, you know, a big inspiration for Cultic, and one of the games I played when I was younger that kind of led me wanting to make another game like that. But I really like Cult. The idea for Cultic really came to fruition after I first played Resident Evil 4, which would have been, oh god, I would have been in middle school then. But it was like I really loved the environments from Resident Evil 4 and the design. Like, it's, you know, with the exception of like the giant boss monsters that you kind of get out of that Resident Evil style game. I really enjoyed the more like oppressive atmosphere of the Resident Evil 4 games, and the fact that you are, for the most part, inside real locations. You know, everything feels real. It's like a real world scale. And so I was like, oh, it'd be really cool to have a game that had kind of a grittier, darker, more oppressive feel and storyline, but at the same time still keep that, like, that actiony, free flowing, fast paced of, like, you know, of Blood. But I just, you know, I hadn't worked on 3D games at all at that point, and so it wasn't really something that I would have possibly been able to work on. But yeah, now I feel like I'm finally at a spot where I was able to put together an engine that runs okay, and everything. And you can shoot that dynamite bundle, by the way, now that you've already tossed it on the ground.
Yeah.
In the newer builds of the game, you can actually pick up unlit bundles of dynamite, so you're not out of luck if you throw it without lighting it.
Right. And did you set out to make like an FPS, or is that just something that evolved out of the art style?
So I tried a third-person shooter first, to kind of stick with the vein of uh, of like Resident Evil 4 and Dead Space and whatnot. But um, being like a third-person shooter and having your character on screen all the times kind of forces you into a position of giving them a little more personality, and maybe a little more like writing, and like character design isn't really my strong suit. And I really didn't have like a strong personality in mind for the protagonist of Cultic. Like, the Cultic protagonist has a storyline, but, like, you know, it's not this kind of thing where he's not the same wisecracking hero that you get from like Caleb and Blood, or from, you know, Duke Nukem and whatnot. So pulling it into a first person perspective instead really helped with that. And also, just from an art standpoint, like, not having to, like, with a third person rig, you know, having really smooth animations and a really good third person rig and controller is really important. And some of that just wasn't going to work with kind of the art style I wanted to go for with this, because obviously it would be hard to do a third person 2-dimensional sprite rig and make that look good. So I kind of pulled away from a third person shooter and went back towards first person and kind of get you up in the action and kind of let the players project themselves onto the character a little bit more.
Yeah. So it's kind of a, if you will, hybridization of, let's say, late 90s FPS and early 90s FPS in that regard.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
it looks and it's designed more like, something from 1997, but, you're playing, let's say, Doom Guy or The Ranger, something like that.
Right. Yeah.
And I suppose the question that beckons here is, what is going on in this game? Who are these cultists? Who are you? Like, what is the whole premise of this game?
So the little bits of story you kind of get from the intro cutscene is that you're in the area that the game takes place. There's been kind of a string of kidnappings and murders and people just going missing, and you play as a detective or former detective who was on this case of trying to figure out what was going on. But the closer and closer you got to try kind of discovering the truth, and the deeper you got into the case, things kind of started getting pulled away from you, and things almost seem like maybe they're getting covered up, or somebody's trying to keep you away from the truth, and then lo and behold, your character's actually kicked off of the force entirely and decides to pursue the case on their own time. They take the leads and everything that they've been following before, and they start to chase down who they think is behind everything that's going on. And so there's a lot more kind of specifics going on that I don't want to get into right now, because it's stuff that people can discover through the story. But ultimately the character is led here to this compound on the outskirts of an asylum that was thought to be abandoned. And as the character arrives, he finds out he's wrong, as he is immediately cut down as soon as he gets out of his vehicle by the cultists that were lying in wait. And so your player takes a grisly axe wound and hits the ground, and everything goes dark, and then you wake up in a mass grave, and that's where the demo starts.
So
And so
typical
not really
Friday
not
night.
yeah, exactly. So you're not really sure what happened or why you're there or why you're not dead, because that you're pretty sure that axe was going to finish you off. But now you're just kind of trying to figure out what's going on and get revenge against these cultists that did you so wrongly when you first arrived.
I mean, that certainly works as a premise for a FPS video game, especially one that is aping the 90s. Anyway, so what kind of cultists will you encounter? At least, let's say in the demo here.
So in the demo, you can expect to see obviously the axe wielding cultists that you're kind of pummeling right now, and then the majority, pretty much all of the armaments that the player can get their hands on, you're going to find cultists who also have those. So in the demo itself, you'll find cultists with hatchets, cultists with handguns, Sten submachine guns, and cultists with shotguns that can also lob dynamite if you're out of their shotgun range. And that's kind of the gamut of enemies that you'll fight in the demo. But there's also a cultist that actually just finished last week. That is the grenade launcher wielding cultist, and he is absurdly accurate, which makes for some really interesting, really interesting gunplay when one of those is lurking around. But then you've also got other creatures outside of the cultists, kind of um, people or animals that have been somehow just horribly mutated into just twisted, disgusting beings, and you got to deal with those too. And there's a couple of those in the demo as well. But the enemy roster has a lot of room for expansion. But in terms of just like getting the gameplay loop running and kind of getting the combat put together, the basic enemy type that I got done first was the cultist that you see a lot of throughout the demo.
And I suppose a very pivotal question for those who have not tried out the demo yet: are these cultists hit scanners?
They are not. The player is the only thing in the game that hit scans, so you actually have an advantage over your enemies in that arena. Enemies fire very fast projectiles, and so like if you're not moving, you're going to get hit. But they are not hit scanners, and so a healthy dose of running, sliding, dodging, jumping, crouching will usually keep you out of their crosshairs pretty well. But yeah, no hit scanning. I know that was it's one of those things that's like in older games, it's everybody knows that it's frustrating to get hit scanned from across the room, but there's also the crowd that that claims, like that's what makes it difficult. That's what makes it a challenge. And I don't know. I always think that's kind of just making the best out of a bad situation or making excuses for the game. Like I don't really think that hit scanning makes for a fun experience unless you really give the player good cues and good telegraphs as to when they're about to be just absolutely destroyed. But it's pretty much just like an ongoing joke, and everyone's very well aware of walking out into an area in blood and just getting shot from across the map by a guy with a shotgun that you had like no way of knowing was there and no way to react to. So no, you've got a pretty good chance to dodge rounds, and enemies that are really far away shooting at you are gonna miss you more often than not until you get a little closer. So,
Yeah.
so
I
no, to
mean,
answer your question, they are not hit scan.
yeah. I mean, that was definitely the most frustrating thing about Blood, all the hit scanning cultists. And, hit scanning was originally because, they didn't really have the technology to render.
Yeah, it takes way less processing power to go, oh, was reticle over target? If so, hits, than it is to like calculate the entire projectile.
Right.
So, it made a lot more sense for, like, say, Wolfenstein or Doom. But, once we got to full 3D, it became a lot less acceptable, which is probably consequently why we saw it a lot less once the jump was made. Not entirely. Like, there were games, like, up to the mid-2000s, at least, that did hit scanning. Like, probably even today. But, it's definitely not a thing as prevalent as it was in the 90s. Like,
Right, and it's always weird in Blood where like because the hit scanning cultists are so unforgiving, whenever you're fighting an enemy that isn't hit scanned, there's just this noticeable drop in difficulty. Like if you walk into a room full of bloated butchers, like it's gonna be a cakewalk because they're super slow, their projectiles are super slow, they're super easy to dodge, and like I usually make it through most of Blood's maps without ever taking damage from a zombie or a bloated butcher. But then, like, as soon as you walk into a room with a cultist, you're almost guaranteed to take damage unless you know they're there. And so, like, hit scanning just creates this weird difficulty roller coaster in Blood, where it's like, it's like a breath of relief when you get to the later campaigns and you finally get the cultists that only throw dynamite, the guys in the green robes, I think.
right.
Because it's like God, they're so easy. Like unless they completely catch you off guard, like all you have to do is just like slowly strafe around them, and they'll never hit you. So, I didn't really want that to be a factor here, and so that was a pretty easy decision early on. But the player does hit scan enemies, so you do have that small advantage over them.
Okay. And I suppose on the flip side here, what is in the player's arsenal? What weapons are he bringing to this firefight?
So as of the demo, the player will have first of all, unarmed. You can go in and punch and kick the crap out of cultists if you prefer. You have hatchets, which you can swing. You can charge up a swing for a heavy attack, which is usually a one-hit kill if you get a headshot. Or if you have more than one hatchet, you can throw them as well. You have the Mauser C96 handgun, the Mare's Leg, which is a 44 Magnum lever-action rifle that's been sawed off. You have obviously a sawed-off shotgun, a Sten Mark V submachine gun, China Lake grenade launcher, bundles of dynamite, and then in the more recent versions of the demo, you also have Molotovs and the fearsome Molomite as well, which is when you duct tape a bundle of dynamite to a Molotov and throw it.
Like, I mean,
What does that do? Slightly burnier than just dynamite?
So it's a dynamite explosion, but also a huge splash of fire around it. It's really good for super spongy enemies because it does a ton of damage right off the rip, and then does additional damage the longer they stand in it. So it's really nice for it. So in like the demo, they aren't super useful because they're just going to one-shot anything no matter what. But when you start to deal with some of the spongier enemies, it's really nice for keeping a little bit of damage on them as long as they stay in the same place for a little bit.
right. And I noticed those are some specific weapons. Like, are those actually based off of real weapons?
Yep, those are all
The
real
one we're
weapons.
using is a real German pistol.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know that. I'm just making sure the audience knows that.
Yeah, all the weapons in the game are based very closely on real world weaponry. and for the most part, they're all kind of just 1-to-1 with those existing weapons. But for the sake of not getting sued by people who might own the copyright or the trademark to those guns, we'll say that's why you don't see the specific name like in game, with the exception of the China Lake, which may as well be fictional with the absolutely limited availability of the rifle, with only like, gosh, like what is it, like 50 of them being produced or something like that. It's a crazy small number. But yeah, they're all based on real weapons. I actually have, um, I've been trying to collect replicas of all of the guns from this arsenal. So I have a replica C96, and I've been trying to find a real one. I keep going to gun shows with the hopes of finding one. I've only found one, but it was chambered in the original Mauser round, and it was in really bad shape, so I did not jump on it. But that's going to be a really expensive purchase whenever I whenever I stumble across one.
And I'm not sure if this question can be answered, but I do feel compelled to ask it nonetheless. Do because these are very clearly some antique weapons, is that just happenstance, or is that a nod to like the time period it's taking place
So
in?
they're by today's standards, yes, they're all antique weapons, but the game takes place in the around the 60s. So these would all be fairly
Okay.
period appropriate weapons. Maybe not necessarily something you would find in rural America, but that's perhaps something to say about the lore or the origin of this cult as to why they have all of these, all these European weapons in their arsenal that they've brought over. So, but yeah, they're for the most part they're all period appropriate, except the China Lake is a tiny bit anachronistic. I believe it was more of like late 60s or early 70s invention. I could be wrong on that, but it's a really fun gun nonetheless. So we're gonna bend the rules a little bit.
Yeah, I'm sure there's some people who will complain, but they were going to be very small in number. Like the people who would be able to pick that out necessarily.
I'm not too worried about that. Maybe the China Lake didn't exist until the 70s in our universe, but this is the Cultic universe, and it existed earlier than that, and there weren't many of them.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And let's see. How do you approach level design in this game?
Gosh, I just kind of throw a bunch of crap at the wall and see what sticks. Before Cultic, the only real games I worked on at length that got beyond just like the really basic like proof of concept were all like roguelites. So I was designing a lot of really small set pieces or like small rooms and kind of, having a dungeon generator stitch them together. So Cultic's really my first foray into like actual extended world building, like building a large contiguous level with like set pieces and points of interest and possible backtracking or areas that loop around on each other, opportunities for exploration. Like this is all pretty new to me, and even this demo level went through a ton of revisions because I just kept on like I would design another part of it and I'm like, oh man, this looks way nicer than the area I just did, and so I would go back and redo it. And so I imagine by the time the full game comes out, this first level is probably going to change a lot because I'm sure I'll have learned a lot more lessons there. It's really interesting to look at games. I think like Dusk is a really good example of that, where you see like
Right.
like the more and more you play Dusk, like the cooler and more intricate the levels get. And I suppose that's probably true of any game that is born of a smaller team. But it's just fun. Like every time I design a level, I'm like learning some new trick or some new thing that's like, oh man, when if I set these up here, I can make a trap for the player here, and I can provide them cover here, and it's just you learn all these little tricks, and so I'm hoping to use those as I move forward to keep making more and more interesting levels. But yeah, it's all pretty new to me right now. So I've tried to get some. I chatted with some of the folks at 3D Realms and gotten some advice from them and gotten some pointers from some of their level designers, which has been really helpful. They've got some phenomenal mappers on their team. A lot of people who have tons and tons of experience putting together levels in Quake map editors and stuff like that. So they've got some serious chops when it comes to like just blocking maps out and making interesting layouts and stuff that's more fun to the player than just linear stairs and chutes and ladders. So that's been a lot of fun.
And right, so much ado has been made about the art style, but can you go into more specifics about how you achieve this.
So it's a pretty simple setup. All of the so like I decided on a palette for the game. I was like, I want this to have a limited color palette. I want, because I want, like, despite it being, 3D models that I'm converting to sprites, look like pixel art. I want it to look like, a game that's made up of sprites. And so I picked out a color palette that was, had a pretty wide range, and covered kind of the more desaturated tones that I needed for, the darker, grungy environments, but also was still vibrant and colorful. And then I just started converting models to it, and if it didn't look good or if there were ranges that were missing, I would add a couple colors to the palette to fill those in. And I've even added more to the palette since Realms Deep, even to kind of expand like the red and green range that was really lacking before. Um, and then there's just some shader work in game to kind of take the final rendered result from the camera and adhere it to that palette. And the palette can even be turned off because there's some people who just don't like art styles, period, and that's fine. But yeah, it's been really fun to work with. It forces a little bit more creativity when it comes to designing textures and designing enemy models, because you need to work with the palette, and so you've got to, I can't have everything be shades of the same brownish color like an outdoor scene, because then it would all blur together. So like the rock walls and cave faces are all tinged blue so that they you know don't just look like the same earthy tones as the ground, and so on and so forth. So it's been a big learning process, to just trying to make that art style shine. And it's gotten a lot of criticism. There's a lot of folks who just straight up don't like it, and don't really provide me any feedback as to why, which is fine. Like, there's some folks that no matter how good of a game Obra Dinn is, they're never going to be able to get past the binary art style, just the black and white, and that's fine. So you can turn the you can turn the palette off altogether. But I really enjoy working with it, and I can't stand playing the game without it.
Right. And are you working within the, let's say, true constraints of what color palettes would have existed in, say, the mid 90s?
No. Actually, a game on DOS would have probably been limited to 256 colors, so it probably would have had a wider color range than Cultic. Cultic's color palette only has 40 colors in it. It is very, very small. So the game that you see being played right now on the stream is comprised of only 40 colors. Is very, very limited.
That is really impressive, actually. I would not have guessed only 40.
Yeah, we'll see if it keeps working or not. I'm absolutely not against expanding the palette as needed. As much as I enjoy working, with as limited a palette as possible, I also want to make sure that it appeals, to other people besides me. So I do make adjustments to the palette as needed, and adjust, level lighting to try to make things stand out more. And because as much as I like the game, now that it's public and now that people are playing it, I need to make sure I'm respecting what other folks want out of the game too. So it's kind of a delicate dance of not wanting to compromise my vision for the game, but also just making something that's not a complete pain in the ass to play. So it's always a little bit of like taking a step back and being like, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll add another color here. Like, okay, fine. Like, it's probably for the best, and it sucks because, like, I fall in love with parts of the game that I work on, and then I show it to the world, and then people are like, no, this sucks, you need to change it. I'm like, damn it, fine, fine, we'll change it. But that's been the really fun thing about having the demo out publicly, is that I have gotten just a ton of feedback on it, which has been great. And a lot of it's technical feedback, just like this doesn't work on my computer, this doesn't work with my monitor. I really prefer that the controls be set up this way. I need inverted this or that. And that's all been great because, like, I'm just one guy with one computer, so it's really tough to test all of these little things. So that's been great. But then also from like like an aesthetics and gameplay standpoint of things people like, things people don't like. And I'm not gonna change every single thing that somebody that kind of speaks up about or complains about. But when a bunch of people kind of start knocking on the same theme, you're like, okay, well, I should probably revisit that.
That does make sense. Like, and what's been the most helpful bits of feedback in specifics?
A lot of it's been just like difficulty stuff, like things that people feel like pretty much unanimously everybody hates the Sten cultist because he is capable of just tearing the player apart in in seconds. And so like a lot of it's been just like difficulty stuff like that. But that even gets back into like the hit scan thing with blood. Some folks are like the Sten cultist is ridiculous. He needs to be taken out of the game. And then some folks are like, I love it. I have such a great time getting my ass torn apart by Sten cultists. And so it's like, okay, so clearly these guys contribute to the difficulty of the game a lot, and that's where I started working with stuff like sliding scales for enemy behavior. So the Sten cultist is, the biggest thing is that you walk out and you immediately get torn to pieces by him. But then I made it so that only happens on harder difficulties. On normal difficulty, he has a longer hesitation before he starts shooting. He makes a very clearly telegraphed sound when he sees the player and raises his weapon, and then he waits a longer amount of time before he starts shooting. He fires less rounds, they do less damage. And so it's not about like getting rid of the enemy entirely, but taking the impacts that they have on players, like, oh, I didn't know this guy was there and he just started tearing me apart. So now on lower difficulties, he gives the player a warning before he starts doing that. Um, so stuff like that, just like because like when I play the game like I test the game on the highest difficulty. Like whenever I'm testing it in Unity, I'm always running on extreme difficulty all the time. So that's what I'm used to. And so playing it on normal is like an absolute cakewalk for me at this point. And so it's really tough for me as the developer to gauge difficulty. And it's the same thing like working on like I worked on a horror game as a little side project a while back, and it was really really difficult to gauge how scary the game actually was because like I've played it a million times. I know exactly when every scare is going to happen. I know exactly when every enemy is going to spawn. And so it's like when you release the demo, it's I don't know if anybody's even going to react to it. I don't know if anyone's going to be scared at all or if it's going to be too scary or what the deal is. So it's stuff like that. And it's and then you watch people play the demo and you watch them just organically learning about everything in the game, what's really difficult for players to understand, what's really easy for them to understand. Like in the earliest version of the demo, you had to manually select keys in your inventory and use them to unlock doors, like kind of like old survival horror style. And people hated that. No, people really really hated that. And that was like I really liked that part. I liked the fact of like when you get to a door, it's like a mini puzzle. Like, oh, which key opens this door? But when 80% of the people who play the game don't like it, then it's like, oh, whatever. Like it's such a small hill to die on. It's not really worth. That doesn't really add a lot to the game, and so it's like stuff like that you kind of learn about through player feedback. And but yeah, I would just say general stuff like that. Of course, there's always like system specs feedback. Like, hey, this runs like crap on my computer. Okay, that sucks. And then so kind of learning about like what it runs well on, what it doesn't run well on, what resolutions does it work on, what resolutions does it not work on. What happens when you try to run it in a 4:3 resolution. And so there's always little stuff like that, but just like the general gameplay feedback has been really valuable.
That is good to hear. And correct me if I'm wrong. You are a solo dev.
That's correct. Everything in Cultic is all me. So all the sound effects, all the music, all the code, all the art, it's all me. It is exhausting.
I mean, yeah, like this is a full 3D FPS. It's built in Unity, sure, but this is very ambitious for somebody's first commercial project.
Yeah, it's I even switching to working on the game full time, I'm like, oh man, I don't know how I'm gonna hit any of these deadlines. Like it's a lot of work for sure. And 3D Realms has they have a huge team and they've offered all kinds of help for the project. But I'm not ready to hand it off to people to help me just yet because I don't feel like I've really gotten Cultic to the place where like I can write a big definitive like Doom Bible on Cultic. Like the story is still changing, the mechanics of the game are still changing, the enemy roster isn't done yet, the weapons roster isn't done yet. And so I really want to get like this first chapter, like this first playable chunk of the game done and have it be just like a fully me thing, really just like the vision that I want for Cultic, so that I can then maybe give that to a team, or even if it's just like some level designers to help me out with stuff like that. I can say like, here's all these levels for reference. Like here, let's focus on these real world spaces. Let's focus on these like realistic environments. Like let's focus on using elements like this, that, and the other for exploration and for secrets. And we kind of hide enemies in this way, and we give the player these options for mobility. But right now, it's just not at the point where I feel like if I were to bring somebody else on, there's not enough of Cultic here for them to look at it and figure out how to continue building the game. You know, they would have to be doing a lot of their own guesswork and a lot of their own like bringing their own idea of what the game should be to the table. And I'm not ready to explore other people's idea of what the game should be because I haven't really fully fleshed out what I want the game to be. If that makes any sense.
Right. It does. So are you looking to release this episodically then?
I'm not entirely for sure. I kind of like that idea because I think if I wait until the entire game is done, people are going to be waiting a really long time. And so I think the idea I have in my head is that I'd like to do it episodically. But it's nothing's really decided just yet. But that would be my preference because then I can kind of build out a smaller but still finished playable chunk of the game. Like a full story arc from start to finish, and then use that to start metering feedback and people's opinions on the game and the difficulty, and then use that as a base point to get a product out there that people can start playing and people can enjoy, um, and then continue to work on it after that, kind of with the support from a release product. And so that's kind of my goal. I would like to do it that way, but it's not entirely my decision, and I'm not really sure yet.
Okay. Then maybe just a maybe more general early access model.
I'm not sure on early access either. I know it's one of those things that a lot of people kind of have a bad taste in their mouth about at this point in time. Some titles have done really well under early access, and some have very clearly abused the model to kind of get a product on the market early and either abandon the game entirely or just drew development out way too long. And I don't really want to put myself in that situation. And so in my mind, if I went the episodic route, that would encompass a completed project. Kind of just like like how Dusk released episode at a time. I don't I
Right.
don't think they were in early access, but I guess I don't really remember entirely. But early access is really sticky. It's a really cool model to get people playing the game already. But I've already got that with the demo, and so I don't really desperately need additional testing outside of what I already have in the demo. So I think I would personally like to avoid early access, but again, all speculation, not entirely up to me.
Right. Technically speaking, I believe Dusk was in early access. This was like a medieval, like they are in early access in the sense that they do the episodic thing. Like, in fact, there's still New Blood's still doing that with like Ultra Kill.
Gotcha. Yeah, I wasn't entirely sure if that's the way they did it, or if when they released Chapter 1, they were like, Chapter 1 is a finished product. It is Chapter 1 of the game. So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm not sure. Some of that might just depend on like whenever we get around to being ready to release that first iteration, kind of what the arena or what the climate kind of looks like for early access. If it's even still a thing, or if Steam's gotten rid of it by then, or I guess we'll just have to see.
Oh, I don't think early access is going anywhere. Like, it's really popular on Steam, and even the Epic Game Store picked that aspect up. So,
And I remember when Greenlight was a thing. That was crazy. That was a
yeah,
lawless wasteland.
yeah, I remember certain YouTubers getting a lot of mileage out of that particular cesspit.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, yeah, like, but it's like I think early access has gotten on the whole better. Like people certainly don't complain about it. Maybe that's just the fact of it being part of the scene, but who knows?
People got used to it.
Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
are you also doing the music to Cultic here?
Yeah. Yep. I am also the composer. A lot of the music. So the music is something I have a lot of fun with because it's like the way that the music is written is kind of like supposed to sound like a blending of like a MIDI soundtrack and like CD audio. So it's like it's actually a lot of it is a custom sound font that I'm building for it. Which for those who aren't familiar, a sound font is basically um, like how the Super Nintendo reproduced music. The Super Nintendo was loaded with, or each game was loaded with a bunch of individual samples of instruments, and then the game itself actually basically had sheet music built into it that instructed the game on how to play those instruments. So instead of storing really long audio files of songs, you have all of the individual instruments you need and then instructions on how to play them. Which is how games like Final Fantasy were able to pack just an absurd amount of music onto these tiny cartridges. But the sound font is effectively that collection of instruments. And so I've been building my own for Cultic because I want it to have like kind of the same thing like you were saying earlier. Like you've got these high poly, high detail weapon models and models for enemies that are then being compressed down into tiny sprites. And I'm kind of doing the same thing with the sound font. I've got a bunch of really high quality, professional grade like orchestral samples and whatnot that I'm then building like a crunchy, lo-fi MIDI sound font with. And so it's kind of been a really fun little sound to put together. But the tough thing is that when you're crunching the audio down so much, you lose a lot of the range of the audio, and so you're having to make tracks that still sound good despite the fact that you don't have all of the high-end sizzle and super deep bass that you would out of like a true hi-fi track. And the fun thing is that I can replicate the tracks in what I like to call either like crunchy or crispy. So like depending on which way I render them out, I can do them in this like crunchy bit crush style, or if I wanted to like build a CD soundtrack for the game, I could go back and render them just a little bit differently with different mastering, and basically put out like the hi-fi, high quality sample version. So yeah, the soundtrack's been a ton of fun. I'm working on a suite of new tracks for the upcoming Halloween update that I think folks will really enjoy. So, but my God, there's so much to do, and I'm driving myself insane. But yes, yep, I do the music. A lot of it's on my SoundCloud. Just SoundCloud. If you just look up Jasozz, you can find my profile in there. A lot of the Cultic tracks are there to be listened to for free. SoundCloud sometimes puts ads on things. I didn't put them there. I don't know how to stop them. It's a monster. SoundCloud needs to be stopped.
Right. And what can people expect out of this forthcoming Halloween update?
So not a lot that I'm going to talk about. The Molotovs and stuff that you've seen and the new fire engine or fire feature that I've been teasing on Twitter will be in it. So the campaign is going to get a little bit of an update to include the new fire system. I am going to try to have the save load system, including quick saving, ready to go. I think it is done, but I have not tested it super heavily yet. So if my testing team comes back and tells me that it's crap and it's not working properly, I might have to backpedal on that. But the goal right now is to get it out there. But then there's also a big other thing that is coming to the Halloween update that I am not ready to talk about yet, but it's gonna be cool. It's a lot of work, a lot of new stuff, but it's lips are sealed at the moment.
Right. Yeah, we wanted to show off the Halloween update here on the program, but apparently things are still a bit too unstable for actual viewing. Unfortunate, but
yeah. Unfortunately, my girlfriend got sick, and I was kind of taking care of her, and then I got the sick, and then I was taking care of myself, and then that cost me a little bit of progress, and so I'm a little further behind than I wanted to be. But it was nice. I actually hadn't been sick, I think, since like whenever COVID first started, and I started wearing a mask everywhere I went. Surprisingly, when I don't have strangers sneezing on me at the grocery store, I don't get sick as often. So,
Weird how that
but I'm
works.
pretty sure I screwed myself over going to a family event where like all of my cousins and their 900 children showed up, and
that'll do it.
my immune system stood no chance against 9,000 sticky hands and child sneezes and whatnot. So. But I got
Hey,
barbecue, so it's all good. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I was really hoping to have at least like the Molotovs and stuff ready to go for you guys to be able to play with on the show, but unfortunately, I did not quite make it in time.
still, we appreciate the effort. Right. And how far along would you say episode 1 is at this stage?
You're playing it right now. The demo map, as far as campaign progress, is about all that's done. All of the rest of the levels are all kind of like storyboarded out, as far as like what I want to be there and how I want those to look and what kind of enemies to fight and so on and so forth. But As far as the maps actually go, I'm still working on all of just the mechanics right now. So, getting the new fire engine put in, getting save and load finished, getting some other back-end systems in place that need to be there, improving support for like keyboard and controller navigation of the menu systems, and all that really unfun, gross, behind the curtain stuff that needs to be done before I start barreling ahead with levels. I'm really looking forward to when I have all the enemies done and all of those back-end systems done, so I can just work on levels and just like see the game grow and progress. Because right now it feels like I can spend a month working on really important things that need to be done, but at the end of the day, I still only have the one map, and so I still feel really far away from being done. But I would really love to have it done by the end of next year, 2022. That's kind of my goal. And I think now that I'm finally working on it full time, I think that's a realistic goal. But I just, with this being my first professional venture into a full length game, I really just have no idea what what's going to look like. I've got a big calendar made up with all of my like end of week goals that ends with the first chapter being done by the end of next year. And if I continue to be on time with that, then we should be in good shape. But yeah, no, we're not very far right now. Very, very not close to being done.
Oh, that sounds like a tall order. Like, I'll be frank, I see this being a 2023 release, given what you've mentioned. But we'll see what happens. You know. Anyway, let's see. I think that's about it for my line of questioning. Do either of you have any further questions?
Not really.
Yeah, I asked my main thing already, so.
Okay. Oh, Jason, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule and being with us here today.
For
That
sure.
was lovely hearing about Cultic. I played the demo earlier today. It's impressively good once again for a first time out, and I look forward to seeing how it develops.
Me too.
Right. And hopefully we'll have you back on the program when episode 1 is further along, let's say, and that whole chunk of game is ready to be talked about. And in the meantime, you can find the demo on Steam, and it is a fully playable map. It's got secrets and everything. Probably take you about 45 minutes to get through first time around. That's about how long it took me. At least on normal difficulty. Harder is probably going to take you a bit more. But anyway,
Extreme is so much fun. It's such a different experience. It's like on normal, you really get to run through and just kind of blast through enemies, and don't have to worry so much about ammo and health. But like extreme really forces you to use the environment to your advantage, really maximize the lanterns and explosive barrels, and amount of axes you throw around, and amount of infighting you trigger enemies into doing. And so if you really enjoy a good challenge, give Extreme a whirl at some point, because it's a totally different, it's a much slower, more methodical experience that really makes you get to grips with like the mechanics of the game and how to dodge enemy attacks, and it's super fun.
Yeah, I tried some of the harder difficulties, and I had to switch to normal to actually get through the game. And,
yeah. The
it's
secrets help a lot on Extreme. The secrets help a ton.
Yeah. And anyway, what you can do in regards to Cultic, besides playing the demo, is you can wishlist this on Steam. As I understand, that helps out the game a lot on the platform. And be sure to do that today. And if you enjoyed this interview, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell to let you know when we broadcast in the future. And Petty, take us to the next segment. All right, welcome to the topic of discussion. So this week we are talking about the Nintendo Switch Online. specifically the Nintendo Switch Online Expansion Pass, since that's been the hot topic of conversation, given the Animal Crossing Direct that happened. We're not going to specifically talk about like anything in regards to the Animal Crossing DLC. We'll be talking about that in relation to the Nintendo Switch Online, because I don't think anyone here is an avid Animal Crossing fan.
I play Animal Crossing a little bit, but I'm not like one of those hardcore people who have like 6 save files or whatever.
Yeah,
I have intentionally avoided Animal Crossing because I always thought I'd feel bad when I stopped tending my town.
that does sound like you. Like, anyway, but yeah. So Nintendo Switch Online's full array of launch offerings have been put on the table, as far as we know, unless there's like some surprise at launch, and in that case we can't really take that into account because it's unannounced. But yeah, so the expansion pass has been the subject of a lot of scorn and anger, and I think it's warranted. Because, okay, in case you don't know, the
It was previously known that they were adding functionality for Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis games as part of their online downloadable library thingy with the net play and the rollback and all that shit. I don't know if the N64 games have rollback. They may not. But what was not previously known was the price point, which is, shall we say, excessive.
To put it lightly.
Yes. Because, so, the expansion pack is going to clock in at $50, $49.99 individually for 1 year, and $79.99 for a family plan.
Yeah.
Okay. And here we've got the main reason why I have not seen one fucking person try to justify this. You know how fans are of a product.
Especially some Nintendo fans.
Right. Like, they'll try to justify a whole host of unjustifiable things.
Looks over at the Wii U.
Yeah. Like, though I imagine if there are people justifying it, it's with the main event isn't like actually the Nintendo 64 or the Sega Genesis offerings. Oh no. The Animal Crossing New Horizons, the Happy Home Paradise DLC is going to be included for free.
Yeah,
And
that's sort of the reason why you can almost justify the price, because that costs $25 on its own. Except that you lose access to some of the functionality of it if you stop your subscription.
Which is why Nintendo's kind of banking on the whole package here. It's not just get the DLC, but also get all these Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis games at no additional cost. Though I don't know how appealing that overall package is.
Well, I can tell you, if you're not an Animal Crossing fan, this package has zero appeal at all for you.
Yeah. Or if you are an Animal Crossing fan, how appealing are a bunch of old-ass games to you? Mm-hmm. There's probably some cross-section here, but I'm questioning that, there's that amount of cross-section for Nintendo to justify this.
Well, and the DLC is also, you can just buy it for $24.
Right.
And it's yours forever. You don't need to keep paying yearly.
Right. But, apparently, the enticement here is, it's not just, from what's been uncovered, it's not just and from what Nintendo's been hinting, it's not just apparently Animal Crossing New Horizons DLCs on the table, it's future DLC. The problem is that's just a hint. We have no idea what span, what scope that kind of DLC offer would entail.
Yeah, if they put out a lot of amazing N64 games, of which there really aren't a lot of, but and a lot of amazing Sega Genesis games, and free DLC that you actually get to keep for a bunch of games, then yeah, maybe it might get to be, worth it. But they're probably not going to expand on it as much if it has low uptake because the price is too high to start with.
Right. So, still, Nintendo is starting to get into the direction of what the other gaming platforms do. I'm like, but they're doing it in the typical Nintendo ass-backwards way. Like, I will say I don't recall offhand Microsoft or Sony offering this kind of premium DLC with their, Xbox Live Gold and PlayStation Plus offerings, but that's probably because they, offer up free games.
Yeah, the games with gold. With Microsoft, you can keep the games even if your subscription lapses. With PlayStation, you continue to have to have a subscription to access those games.
It's still free full games.
Yeah.
Granted, a lot of that tends to be smaller indie fare or older titles, but it's still
first party.
Yeah, it's still free stuff. So you could argue that there's kind of a trade-off, and yes, also Animal Crossing New Horizons did phenomenally well. It's one of the highest-selling games of all time.
I mean, in fairness, it did come out at unpredictably the best time for it.
Yeah, and that's the part of this package that makes the most sense to me. Okay, offering that as an enticement, yeah, that's fresh, that's new, that's potentially taking sales away from the actual DLC. I get that. The whole classic games angle has always been a bit more suspect. Like with the Nintendo, not just with the Genesis and Nintendo 64 offerings, but even going back to the Super NES and NES offerings. It's not just that you're seeing the same games released over and over again. It's the lineup doesn't get diversified a whole bunch.
Well, and there's also some huge omissions on the NES and Super NES that we haven't gotten yet.
Yeah, I know people are still banging on about Earthbound.
Yep.
Look, Earthbound takes a bit more to get released because Nintendo doesn't quite own that. They're a part owner of the IP, along with HAL and Sagashio Itoi. That's that's kind of why it isn't as freely released as some of the other games. I mean, clearly Nintendo can do that, but this is why, Earthbound cost more on the Wii U's Virtual Console than other games. But kind of the trade-off with the Super NES and the NES games being the bulwark of freebie games included. Not just was online online multiplayer. Not gonna lie, that's probably the biggest selling point of the upcoming Nintendo 64 and Sega Genesis, especially Nintendo 64. Nintendo honestly is kind of missing the boat here, I think. They should really be pushing Mario Kart 64 being online multiplayer, unless it's absolute garbage. Because I know that's a fucking selling point. Because I know that was a fucking selling point back in the day. Mario Kart's multiplayer went online back in 1997, but by God, did that move units.
Oh God, yes.
I'm like, fuck's sakes. I had Mario Kart 64. My brother did. A lot of multiplayer on that. Just that title. You also got Mario Tennis as one of the launch titles. Not as famous for its multiplayer sessions as Mario Kart 64, which is probably one of the most famous multiplayer games of that era. Quite frankly,
it's also the debut game of the great Waluigi. famous for not being in Smash Ultimate in spite of the massive public outcry.
That is incorrect.
Well, he's in
You're
his
thinking-
first.
Oh, was he in something else before that? I thought that was his first one.
Mario Golf.
Ah.
Yeah, that was the first Camelot Mario sports game, and he debuted in that, if I'm recalling correctly. But yeah,
No, Mario Tennis was first, 2000.
Mario Golf was 1999.
I'm not sure he was in that.
I suppose we have to look this up now. Yeah.
I remember back at the time it was a big deal that they were making fucking Waluigi to be Wario's doubles partner.
Right, but let me look this up. He could be. I
No
could be
Waluigi in Mario Golf.
Okay, so I was mistaken. I might be thinking just Camelot there. But yeah, he was Mario Tennis first. But anyway, yeah, Mario Tennis. That is a fantastic multiplayer game, and it's actually one of the tops of the system. Once again, maybe not in the highest tier of conversation, but certainly in the certainly in the ballpark of the all times. And the third one is fucking Star Fox 64.
Mm-hmm.
This is the weak link in the launch lineup in terms of online multiplayer. I played some Star Fox 64 multiplayer back in the day. It's all right-ish, but what is Star Fox 64 regarded for? Not its multiplayer.
It came with a Rumble
like,
pack.
Yeah, the Rumble pack, the single-player campaign.
Yeah, which is quite good.
Yes. I played a lot of Star Fox 64 back in the day. Especially when there wasn't a lot of games to play on the N64. And that gets into another huge question mark about the expansion pack. The sustainability of things. Because, once again, Nintendo isn't known for being the most reliable of providers for past a certain point. And look at the Super NES and NES releases. That they haven't been. It hasn't been good. Let's just be honest with that.
Yeah, they've been kind of mixed.
Yeah. Now, certainly the Genesis has more potentiality in terms of future releases, just because there were so many more Sega Genesis games than there were Nintendo 64 games. I'm not sure the exact ratio of releases here, but the N64 had 200-300 games tops, which certainly is more than say the Jaguar or the CDI or a lot of failed systems I could input here, but certainly a far cry from let's just say the NES, which had about 1,000 games. The cart thing hurt the Nintendo 64 in terms of real development. But that isn't, and it's also, they have rectified some problems. That is to say, Rare is on board. Not that big of a surprise considering the Banjo-Kazooie connection in Super Smash Brothers. But, it's this is the first time we're seeing the Nintendo 64 or Rare games back home since the Nintendo 64. Yes, I know they've been released on the Xbox One. That's never going to be the home of Rare's N64 games, no matter how much Microsoft wants it to
Well,
be.
these are the original unaltered versions. The re-releases had many of the Nintendo references removed for obvious reasons.
Well, yeah, there were other things done to Banjo-Kazooie. There were quality of life improvements, quite frankly, that make the Xbox Live version of this better than the Nintendo 64 version. Like, you can be all about the original experience all you want, but I'll take the version that remembers that you got the fucking notes. No, seriously, I hated that shit back in the day. You know, collecting, like, if you don't collect the 100 notes before you die, you lose the notes.
Oof.
Or, you know, it remembers the progress. It remembers how many notes you got over. Like, if you got 77 notes, you got 77 notes, but you still had to recollect those. Like I said, that alone is why the Xbox Live Arcade version is the superior version. You know, but still, it's good to see Banjo-Kazooie there. That presumably opens up pretty much all of Rare's other releases, save 2. Now, obviously, everyone's going to remember Goldeneye. Like, Goldeneye to this day is still one of the benchmarks of the N64. It's just,
they have. I think they'd be in the clear because they're not modifying the software, but the Bond or the whatever fucking estate owns the fucking Bond things.
Broccoli's not. Yeah, no, I will tell you right now, Broccoli's not going to allow that Bond game loose. It's not going to let any of the old Bond games loose because they've gotten really finicky over the shooty bang elements of old Bond games. You know, not to mention...
It's almost like the character has a job where one of the major facets of the stories about the job that he has that are told is that he shoots people.
Almost like he has a license to kill. Huh.
Okay, so to delve into it further, this is the reason why they picked IO Interactive. They want him to act more like, you know, an actual agent. And I'm not saying that wasn't possible back in the day, but when you actually try that, you get fucking Mission Impossible for the N64, and nobody wants that. You know, I know it has its fans, everything does, but I had Mission Impossible back in the day as well, and it wasn't good.
I have the PS1 version.
Go figure. Stealth gameplay is tricky to make entertaining.
Well, keep in mind. Well, okay, Mission Impossible was a game released in 1998 and had some severe development hell issues. Remind me to recommend that to fucking What Happened one day. Like, that really needs to be covered. But, you know, anyway, Goldeneye. Don't expect that to get re-released. The other one, the one you probably don't know or don't remember, is Mickey Speedway USA. Rare actually has a second kart racer on the N64. Like, and nobody remembers this thing. Like, there was quite a bit of hype around it pre-release because it's Rare, it's Nintendo, it's Disney, it's a kart racer. Diddy Kong Racing, one of the most venerated N64 games out there. And it seems to be an okay kart racing game. You know, that's kind of the downfall, downside of working with Disney. They're really restrictive with their licensing, especially when you get to the main cast, Mickey Mouse and Friends.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
I think they blew like fucking millions on just getting Sora into Smash. Jesus.
No, as I understand it, apparently this was a project handed off to a junior team, so you don't get quite the track design, the level design of Diddy Kong Racing, though you also don't get the fucking collectathon aspect of Diddy Kong Racing. Look, Rare, it's commonplace to know now, but even back then, I thought Diddy Kong Racing had way too much fucking padding. You know, it's like that silver coin challenge and raising the boss a second time. That just seemed unnecessary. Like, anyway, but presumably Diddy Kong Racing is back on the fucking menu. And full release. Yeah, you know, Microsoft owns a few characters there, but they're buddy enough to have Banjo-Kazooie on the platform, so hopefully we'll see it. It's like, anyway, like the real fitting part of the Nintendo 64 is third parties. Now, contrary to what people might say, yes, there were major third parties of the age that supported the N64 very vigorously. It's just like you can. A lot of them are fucking dead. Acclaim, dead. The original THQ, dead. Midway, dead. Like, probably the biggest support, Hudson, dead. Like the biggest supporters.
Eaten by a company that got eaten by a company that got eaten by a company.
Or they just died. Like, Midway died. Acclaim died. Like, THQ died, but a lot of their assets were reconstituted into THQ Nordic. But my point is, a lot of the major supporters of the N64 are no longer in existence. Like, now, once again, like, most of Midway's stuff was picked up by Warner Brothers, but it's a question of how interested is it Warner Brothers in re-releasing the, let's say, N64 version of San Francisco Rush. With Acclaim stuff, it's actually, we've been seeing some of their games re-released, just not in this kind of service model. Turok 2, Shadow Man, and Forsaken, they all got individual re-releases with quality of life improvement. I mean, like, there's perhaps a chance that we'll see Iggy's Wrecking Balls on the Nintendo Switch Online, but, perhaps not very. It is weird that Winback is being picked as the premier representative, let's say, of third-party Nintendo 64 games right now. But, Tecmo Koei is still around, and this was kind of the biggest game they released for the N64. Like, you could probably get Konami on the field here with some releases here. It's just,
man, Castlevania 64?
Yeah, you should hope, hopefully we get the Goemon games. Those would be worth revisiting. Especially Goemon Great Adventure. I keep telling people how good this game is, and all I get is fucking blank stares. It's like, yes, Ogre, the fucking Goemon Great Adventure game is better than the Mystical Ninja starring Goemon. Like,
They're different genres, sort of, aren't they, if I remember correctly?
Yes, they are. Like, I don't have time to get into it.
I know. I don't disbelieve you.
I'm just saying, like, so many fewer people play Goemon's Great Adventure, and that pisses me off. More people should experience this game. It's arguably the best Goemon was ever and will ever be. Because, as far as I know, the franchise is still dead. Or we could get Hybrid Heaven, one of the few N64 RPGs. It's got some rough edges, but it's also got,
Gentlemen, and I use the term loosely.
We should probably wrap up here.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, that'll about do it for this conversation. And yeah, that'll about do it for this installment of Fragments of Silicon. Anyway, no Friday show this week. Let's see, on the Sunday reviews, we'll be having reviews of Cyber Shadow, Magic Colors, Knight's Retreat, and Revo. Well, until a few minutes from now, I shall wish you good gaming.